Hi everyone, I'm just coming back. Myself some more water, ready to answer some questions. We've got some really good ones. I'm gonna just try and get as many as I can in because I think we got some really good ones. So some folks had really good questions about what would be considered high arousal and what would be considered low arousal in terms of that activity triangle that I was talking about. And that's a really, really great question. So specific questions that folks had were is public access training high arousal? Yes, I think that is. And by high arousal, what I mean by that is they might not be panting and running when they're doing public access training, but they are alert, cognitively alert. They are present, they are thinking, they are working through stress and challenge. And so that's what I would that's kind of where I'd go with that. So I think that public access training would definitely be considered high arousal. Most training to me is going to be considered high arousal, I think. So I actually think training is there on the slide, just in case anyone's looking back. You can see training sessions, urban exploration, these sorts of things would all be considered high arousal. And then lower arousal stuff, there are still some problem solving things there, like licking exercises and chews, but it's more repetitive and less, I think, mentally stimulating, and tends to kind of calm them down. But again, every dog is different. So I guess we'll have to just adjust it to suit your specific dog. Jumping and mouthing. Jumping and mouthing discussed a few times in this chat. Some of this jumping and mouthing is excited. Some of it is redirection when the dog is maybe feeling another big feeling. But the jumping and mouthing behavior, very common. That reel with me talking to Ash, that's what he's doing in that video. And I'm getting bruised and I'm like, everything's fine. So as much as you want to yell at them, try not to. Even if it hurts, I know it's hard. But it's just not going to work from my understanding in the majority of cases. There are some cases, especially very sensitive dogs, where that might work, but what's the fallout of scaring them enough for that to work, right? Probably more significant for that sensitive dog, right? So you're going to want to stay away from that stuff if you can. Instead, I'd be thinking a little bit more about that, managing their behavior piece. So how are we managing their behavior to avoid that jumping and mouthing happening? So here are some things that we did for Ash. For the first 2 years of his life, 100% of the time he was tethered or on a leash. 100% of the time. And to us, that was resisting the urge to be overconfident and managing his environment, because he was a staffy that was bred to do sports. So he was like, look how high I can jump. And I was like, no, I'm not here, please. Thank you. He was like, look how great I can bite the TV. I was like, no, we're fine without you biting the TV. Thanks for showing us. But it's normal for many dogs to try a bunch of stuff. And so at the very least, are we using a leash? Do we have baby gates up? Because if you have a loose dog who's biting at you, if I can't pick up a leash, I'm going to go and stand on the other side of a door or on the other side of a baby gate and put something in between me and them. As much as in my head, I go, push the dog to the ground and say, stop doing that. That's my instinct. Not going to lie. That's my instinct. I did not have it, that's what I learned, right? When I was younger. What I actually need to do is walk away and put something in between us and then help him calm down, help him soothe. I'm not trying to punish him. I'm not like, you are relegated to that side of the baby gate. It's not a timeout. It's I will not allow you to bite me. It is okay to feel feelings. It's not okay to bite me, right? I'm right here, but I won't let you bite me. That's what we're trying to say in these moments. We're managing their behavior as much as possible, preemptively, ideally. If I know someone's going to be coming in and out of the room, I'm going to tether Ash and I'm going to sit on a couch a few feet away, because I don't want him jumping and nipping on me because he gets so excited that someone just came into the room. And this was normal for us during the teenage years. Luckily now we have to do a lot less of this, but only because we did this at the beginning and we did it consistently. By managing the behavior, it's not allowed to be reinforced. And to be honest, it will probably go away as they get older. Many people are like, we have to fix it and work on it now. And I want to train the dog to not jump. And I'm like, nah, use a leash. They'll get old soon. And then they won't jump as much. And then teach them. Or just get to a place where you're in a consistent routine and you're managing the behavior so it's not happening. Then teach them. Don't try to teach them while there's a fire, while it's happening. That's not a learning moment. So manage the moment, regulate yourself. Think about, okay, what do I need to do in the future to make sure this doesn't happen again? And then go from there. If we're having dogs that are actually biting and drawing blood, we might be thinking about muzzles. We might be thinking about, well, we're definitely thinking about muzzles. We're definitely thinking about going to a professional to get specific advice. I cannot give specific advice for dogs who are biting out of fear, biting out of big feelings of unsafety. All I can say is get them away from the thing that they're scared of. If you have to walk them and they're redirecting, try to use a humane muzzle. But before you do any of that, just go speak to a trainer who can give you an actual plan so that you're not guessing and you feel more confident in and be able to like turn up with confidence for your dog. All right. Sorry, I got really stuck on that question. Let me move on. Someone's mentioned about hypervigilance and not being able to feel safe on walks. And I imagine that a lot of folks here are in a similar position. If you're in an urban environment, especially, we find dogs really struggling with that hypervigilance around the street when they're just going for walks and to go use the bathroom. If you're finding it really hard to even get your dog to use the bathroom without there being a fear state that is unhealthy, if you're struggling to meet their needs because they're so fearful that they can't enjoy the park, that's when we need to speak to a veterinarian, even if this dog is very young. And so we talked a little bit about abnormal fear. A dog that's hypervigilant constantly outside of the home, who doesn't have a yard, who lives in an apartment in an urban setting, that's abnormal. It's actually a normal scenario to us, but it's abnormal to the dog. Like, it's abnormal to the majority of canines, that scenario, that setup. And from my experience, if we're seeing a dog that's consistently hypervigilant, dogs that are we're unable to meet their needs, they're unable to experience joy, they're unable to perform natural behaviors because of their anxiety and stress in their environment, we either need to change the external environment, they move out of the city, or we change the internal environment, we change the biochemistry of the animal to adapt to that location. Anxiety medications are one of the best ways to increase neuroplasticity and get a dog out of a chronic stress state. And we see a lot of dogs in the city thriving through the combination of speaking to a veterinarian for stress management and then a robust training protocol. Even for young dogs, lots of people ask me about this. They're like, should we be waiting till they're an adult? Should we be waiting until they've solidified all of these behavioral and emotional patterns? No, we should not. We should start now. We should start now when they need help the most. And we know that because this adolescent period is challenging and also important in terms of how they will behave in the long run. So I often say, go to a veterinarian, go to a veterinary behaviorist, someone who can really see your dog's emotional health and physical health from an expert lens and give you an help whether or not you should be giving them stress management help. For lots of these questions that I'm seeing about how do I know if this is excitement or redirect or reactivity, or how do I know if this is redirected mouthing or something else, two things: we track data, we take videos. Track data, take videos. Those are the two things. If you're unsure, keep a log of your walks and your dog's behaviors and how much they sleep. And if you do something like one of our programs, we have logs that we give you, we have everything, like we have it all laid out for you. And if you wanted to buy the Heal webinar, you get some of those so within that bundle. You'll get some of the trackers. I'll send it or down below. You'll get it in the email, or you can click below. But taking videos and tracking what you're doing on a daily basis is going to be the best way that you can do this, whether that's you have a friend come out with you and video one walk for your trainer, or I have clients who have little chest harnesses, they put their phones on and they go out with their walks with their dogs and video it for me, and I get to watch it back. But without getting eyes on your dog, it's going to be very challenging for any professional to give you any feedback without those two things: data tracked of, you know, what you did for the last week, and then some body language of moments that you think might be important for us to see. And if you don't know what's important, film the walk, film a playtime, film a training session. So helpful for us to be able to see those things. Ooh, okay. So I've got a lot of questions about like perceived safety as well. If we have dogs that are scared of children, people, other dogs, whatever that is, the first thing I want 2 weeks where they don't see that trigger. It's a holiday. They get a holiday. We need to prove that we can achieve that first, because if they are constantly being exposed to children, dogs, people on a daily basis, they're going to be in a constant state of hypervigilance. They're going to be constantly resensitized. Every time that kid across the street screams and your dog goes, ah, they're learning that children are pretty scary. That's mapping into their world as they perceive it. So we'll need to be avoiding them as much as possible. We'll need to be probably making significant changes to your walks. Now, for some people, that's like not walking or taking the car to different places. For others who live in the city, we'll need to equip you with skills, survival skills, to get through your day with your dogs, to go to the bathroom, to get their exercise needs met. This was something that I had to do with my dog Hira when we lived in Manhattan and New York. We had survival skills to get through the day. We had survival skills to live in our house because we lived in a really noisy apartment block. And so we needed protocols and training things just to be able to live in the home without him being too triggered. So to get specific like skills, it will be things like, you know, teaching your dog to quickly turn around and move away from a trigger with you, or teaching your dog to put their paws up and find a cookie so that they're not looking while a dog walks around or something like that. We'll be thinking about what that looks like for your dogs. But we often have to make significant changes to give them a break to start off with, so that they're not in a place where they're hypervigilant. Then we can start to change how they feel about the triggers. It's a process that I'm not going to go into today. Counter conditioning and desensitization to all the different triggers that your dogs could be stressed about is a little bit too big for today. I would recommend checking out our webinar library on our website for other topics like leash reactivity, separation anxiety, handling aggression, that kind of stuff, where you can find some more common topics, but it's too big to go into. Essentially, though, you will be doing training sessions with your dog probably 2 times a week, 1 time a week around kids, under making sure that you're being supported by a professional who can keep everyone safe. No DIY training sessions around children, please. Do not like. Thumbs down to that. I've got one question about long lines, recommended length of long lines. I like really long lines. I use 30 feet, 40 feet with adolescent dogs who tend to wander a lot farther than puppies. With puppies, you can often get away with a 20 foot. 30 foot, but with adolescent dogs you might want to be going up to like 20, 30, and often what that will mean is learning long line skills. How do you manage 40 feet of biothane leash? It's a skill, but you look really sexy when you do it well, so it's worth learning. I'm not gonna lie about that. It just, you look cool. It's a cool thing. So that's definitely something that a trainer can help you with as well, or you can look online. There's some good stuff there. Oh, helping your adolescent dog through grief. My 11-year-old dog died 10 days ago, and I want to help her thrive without her confident older brother's influence. Oh, first of all, we're all going to just send you so much love and support, because that must be so challenging. I would be probably, first of all, really thinking about their perceived safety and during this period, because likely when there are big changes, sensitivity might increase. They might not be okay being left alone during this time. They might need you to stay with them a little bit longer. And that would be the stuff that I'm really thinking about, is making sure that they feel safe and acknowledging that a lot of the things that they used to feel good about, they might not feel good about anymore. So making those adjustments for them if possible, and then thinking about meeting their needs and trying to find joy with them where you can. They're still a young adolescent dog, so trying to get them playing again, trying to get them sniffing for food, even little things like that will regulate their nervous system, because that's often what grief is. It's a state of dysregulation that we get stuck in. So just like us, you know, sniffing and breathing, calm, slow movement through nature, cuddling, massage, you know, little things like that. Try and find the joy. And we're sending you lots of love, because that must be really challenging. Okay. What can I do when my dog is barking at the front door when he sees things down the street? I try to calmly walk him away and he comes with me, but then he runs right back. I can't keep him in place if anything's happening outside. Excellent. This is a great example of a really common adolescent dog challenge. Adolescent dogs can often become much more wary of things around their perceived resting space, their safe spaces. That can often look like becoming alert. And many of these adolescent dogs will actually sit by the door or the window waiting to see something to then bark at them. Okay. This dog is exactly like my poodle Hero. He did the exact same thing. He'd sit by the front door, and every time he heard something in the hallway, he'd be barking and growling. The first thing I did is I put window film up on all of the windows. If you Google window film or pop it into Amazon, you will find it's really easy to find. You just pop it on your windows and it means that they can't look out of it anymore, but the light still comes through. Start there, because you shouldn't be playing behavior whack-a-mole. If managing your dog's behavior depends on you being there and being present and being there with cookies, that's not gonna cut it. Because what happens when you're pooping? What happens when you're cooking? You know, it needs to be an environmental arrangement to set you up for success, rather than based off of you responding in the moment, because you'll burn out super quick, trust me. So put the window film up on everything. Maybe even put a baby gate up so they can't get to the door. If you have a corridor, you could just block off the corridor. All right, guard dog, you're not allowed to go sit in the prime guard dog spot anymore. Sucks to be you. Sorry, kid. No dice. But make it an environmental setup. And if your dog, if you have like, I have been in that scenario before, where someone has like an extremely beautiful modern loft apartment without a single wall, and they're like, well, how do I manage this? Get a steel bolt, put it in the wall, far away from the door, get a 10-foot leash, tether your dog on one side of the apartment so that they're away from the noise. But if they're in the prime guard dog position, they're gonna rehearse it over and over again. And if you are trying to train every single time someone walks past your door, you're gonna burn out yourself, you're gonna burn out the dog. The dog's not gonna want to train with you anymore. You're gonna get kind of okay results, like moving away but going straight back, and ultimately we won't see what we want to see, which is nonchalance towards that stimulus. Just like with the child sensitivity, I would like 2 weeks where your focus is that your dog does not react to anything. That's it. That's the whole goal, is that you preempt it in some way. And to learn more, I would go to our webinar library and watch the Managing Reactivity webinar, because it goes into all of these things in depth. You can get the slides, and it has links to the products like window film and all sorts of other things. So you can check that out. I'll put it in the notes. When I say manage their behavior, I don't think people get how much I mean manage their behavior. I mean, like, I'm not allowing it to happen in the first place. Let's look at a few different examples of this. So my dog pretends she's a pancake when she's on walks if she sees another dog, or if we're walking in the opposite direction of her favorite park. So the pancaking is quite classic, or a dog that just refuses to go, plants on the leash. Obviously, again, nothing that I'm giving you here is specific advice. If I were to work with you as a client, I would need so much information to give you specific advice. But in general, when it comes to like pancaking towards something an animal wants, we need to cut off the reinforcement for that behavior, like cutting off the blood supply to it. We have to stop allowing that to end with they get to play with the dog or they get to go to the park. if we're living in a really busy neighborhood that's full of dogs and we have an adolescent hypersocial dog, if we're going on lots of walks in that neighborhood, we might be setting that dog up to fail by exposing them too much to things that are too challenging. So with adolescent dogs, I'm often not walking them around other dogs as much as I can, and then providing them with a consistent schedule of play dates so that they can get their needs met in a specific way. But it's when we start to get confused, that's when things start to get a little bit like not great. If we're like, oh, they didn't get to play with any dogs this week, so I guess I'll just let them play with that one for a bit after they pancaked, that's unclear. And clarity is important. That's kind of the develop clear communication as the fifth point. That's why that's there. And it's unclear to sometimes reinforce behaviors and other times not. I would want to know a lot more about your dog's physiology and routine, but there is a world in which I would be recommending that you physically move your dog if they plant. And I'm not going to give you anyone that recommendation because I don't know your dogs. I don't know what equipment you're using. I don't want them to be injured or upset. However, I would be thinking a lot about how can we not even get to that point in the first place so that we're not having to pull them away. What can we do to avoid that, and how can we meet their needs for play in a consistent way so that they know I get that met over. I play with these people. I don't interact with dogs on the street. Dogs on the street, nothing. I have to pay attention to mum. I get to play in these contexts that are very obvious. That's usually the best option I can give for you guys. I've got more questions about noise reactivity. So another person saying, I've been trying to catch it just before the barking starts when an upstairs neighbor is walking in the back hall. And you said that you've been treat scattering on the ground. Again, I'm going to point you to that managing reactivity webinar, which gives you a full reaction protocol, all the things that you'll want to manage this in a whole hour and a half format, but in a nutshell. Feeding your dogs to distract them when there are noises or triggers in the environment, totally fine. Feeding your dogs to help them calm down after they've barked, also totally fine. But what can we do before that? What can we do before they bark to get them more shielded from the triggers that they might be experiencing? So if your upstairs neighbor is walking in the back hall, could we block off access to the part of the apartment that's near the back hall? Could we be putting a radio or a white noise machine by the noisiest part of the apartment? Could we be, and I've done this, messaging people and saying, hey, Tim from upstairs, I'll buy you a 12-pack of beer if you text me when you come downstairs for the next week so that I can train with my dog, so that you know before he's coming down. And you can put a leash on your dog and do food scatters for them while he moves or something like that. What can we do before so that we're being more preemptive and less reactive to these triggers if we can predict what's going to happen? From, I think it says Kathy, my 10-month-old Golden is somewhat rough with my 11-year-old lab, using his back end to bump her, putting his paws on her back. She barks at him to stop, but he gets so overexcited that he can't stop her, and he then seems to bark. I try to leash him part of the time to stop him when he's rough, but it just keeps happening. What else can I do? This is a really great question. This is exactly the scenario that I was in with Hira and his my best friend who also works at CCA, a co-founder of CCA, her dog, Hayes. Hayes and Hira lived together when Hayes was an adolescent, and they had this exact kind of dynamic, which is kind of like a bullying dynamic or like an escalating, dysregulated dynamic. And often the play, it kind of isn't that playful. It's like a little bit tough. It's a little bit mean. It's a little bit too rough. And the dog just cannot control themselves. With dogs like this, in multi-dog households, I usually start with 100% separation. I know that that sounds a lot. And from my experience, if we can get them to a point where they're resting and relaxing together, and then we can give them specific play times, which are supervised, we can completely turn it around and get them to the point where they can then coexist freely together. But if we're in this cycle, stepping in when he gets too rough is likely not going to cut it. In fact, I think the cycle will continue. So from my experience, we do full-time separation, and I actually try to get these dogs interacting with other dogs, not each other as much. I try to get the young dog playtime with other dogs, not the 11-year-old lab. And I have a suspicion that your 11-year-old lab might not actually want to play with the golden, and might actually be feeling other feelings that are coming out as this kind of play, because often I see dogs using play as a way to create predictability and control in an environment. So Hera did this with Hayes. Hera would incite play with Hayes in this like really aggressive way and kind of goad him and bully him. And then Hayes would kind of fight back, and then there'd be a scuffle. And it was almost like Hera's going, I told you he was an asshole. See what he just did? Did you see that? You know, low key, I've seen humans do this. I've seen teenagers do this to their siblings. I did this to my brother, right? Cut it off immediately. I live in a house with 4 dogs, and often they are all separated. Sometimes we have weeks where we just give them a break from each other, and we just say, you two guys just need a minute. So obviously speaking to a professional will help you do that seamlessly, because it's a big change, but it can be done. We do it all the time. These kinds of more extreme management and managing their exposure to things they can't handle, that's really what I'm focusing on in this adolescent period. We don't have to train them. We don't have to teach them. We just have to manage it right now. And once we get that management in place, then maybe we can start thinking about learning something else. Double dogs are always going to be challenging, aren't they? So you've got 2 litter mates who are 14 months and struggle when they hear anything outside, and sometimes they can't even be redirected. This is the sort of situation where without more information, I'm not going to be able to really help too much. I would definitely point you in the direction of the Managing Reactivity webinar, so that you can just get the basics, to make sure that you've got the basics in place. But if they are in a noisy environment and it's really challenging for you to confine them, shield them from the noises, and they're reacting so much that they can't even be interrupted and redirected, red flags are going up that if you were my client, we might be going to the vet to consider whether or not they need help regulating their nervous systems, because now there's 2 of them as well. And if there's one barking that sets off the other, that's like double. Ooh, we got an 11-month-old Aussie here from Anna, who's only afraid of strangers in certain situations. So first of all, Aussie, so we've got a herding breed, which is not unusual to see them being fearful of new people, but also unusual pictures, unusual threatening pictures. So for example, we have narrow hikes. So a shepherd that's really bred to be sensitive to spatial pressure, experiencing more emotional overwhelm when funneled into a narrow pathway with strangers, especially with poor visibility. So we have dogs that don't see very well in general, especially in the dark. And so they're unable to see. They feel spatially pressured by the narrow hike. People popping out around the home especially seems to stress this animal out as well. And these are all really classic signs of one, a herding dog, but also things that adolescents can struggle with. Surprises, people surprising them out of doors, people around their home, small spaces, poor visibility, spooky. That danger system, it's all set, ready to go. They're leaving their litter. They're out on their own as young adolescents. Oh, what's that? Got to be prepared. It makes sense, right? You're mentioning that if his body language is ignored, Anna, that you step in front of people and create space, but he will react. One thing I would say is I wouldn't wait for his body language to be ignored. I would come in straight away with help and instruction for him. So just like we were doing with Ash in that leash walking video that I showed you, where he's passing people on a narrow sidewalk, I'm assuming he's going to have a problem with it. I'm like, this is a pretty classic scenario that you might not like. Let's work on it preemptively. We've got the food out, see how far away they are, and we've already got him engaged. That person in black is one of our friends. We know them, they're filming us. But we've started from a way big distance, and Ash is getting a continuous stream of food. we've already placed ourselves in between him. If anyone tries to approach, no, thank you, we're training. Also, we're really obviously training. Look at us. So people tend to leave us alone. But the gist is this preemptiveness. Don't wait for the problem and then react. If we're noticing even a tiny whisper of discomfort around something, all right, we're going to come in with the stake. When we see someone on a hike, we're going to pull off to the side. We're going to get all of the guardians in between the dog and the scary people, and we're going to feed until they move away. If that doesn't work, we might not be able to hike this dog successfully in that location. That might not be what we have to do for them. You're mentioning, does this fit the red flags thing? To be perfectly honest, an 11-month-old Aussie who's doing a little bit of barking when their body language is ignored in certain situations, relatively neurotypical to me. I think that sounds quite normal. However, an 11-month-old Aussie is like a Ferrari, you know? We're not talking about your average pet dog. This is an Australian Shepherd. These dogs were bred to be hypersensitive. So it is a little bit abnormal insofar as the fact that you have this breed who is maybe going to be more likely to be sensitive. So I would still be working with a trainer if I were in your position. If I had anyone has a herding breed and they're in adolescence, work with a trainer. If anyone has a hunting breed in adolescence, work with a trainer. If anyone has, you know, like these dogs were bred to be more sensitive so that they could perform their jobs effectively. So although it's quote unquote normal for this dog, I would still imagine you'd need support to get through this period successfully. And it sounds like you're already doing a really amazing job, but the small adjustments like some of the ones I'm suggesting can make a huge difference in the long-term prognosis of how they feel around strangers. Okay, Veronica, how do I handle tunnel vision? So my 16-month-old Doxy, so like a Dachshund, Doxy sausage dog for anyone who doesn't know the breed, extremely reactive on leash, barking and lunging to bigger dogs. He sometimes gets tunnel vision where nothing can make him focus on us. And most of the time you have to drag him away from a situation. At home, when he gets barky, we can usually redirect him. But those tunnel visual situations, it's really challenging for him. So I'm seeing that your pup is going from kind of a 0 to 100 when they see triggers and struggling to kind of come down from that. You're mentioning that food can move him away with a high value treat, but otherwise you're having to physically move him. And you're only able to use the food inside to get his attention. So first of all, dachshunds, sausage dogs. We have a lot of dachshunds at CCA, a lot of adolescent dachshunds at CCA. One of our trainers has a dachshund as well. And I think these dachshunds, there's also different reasons why, but one of the reasons is often health related. They have these long bodies and often, if you're in certain areas like London, for example, you might find that we might not be getting the best genetic stock for these dachshunds, especially popular pet breeds. Sometimes we see that they're getting early arthritis, they're having issues with their joints. So before touching anything with a long dog or any other breed that I know is predisposed to musculoskeletal pain, I'm going to have to investigate that. Because I would imagine if we're seeing a dog that's sound sensitive, a dog that's funny about big dogs, a dog that's getting very, very, just gonna plug my laptop in, but a dog that's getting very triggered 0 to 100 vibes, I might be thinking about ensuring that dog doesn't have any like back pain, leg pain that might be contributing to this, because I just see it so frequently. So I'll start there, just because the breed is putting up a little flag for me that we need to check there. But other than that, it sounds like we have quite a lot of different triggers going on. So some triggers outside, some triggers inside. And I see that you're trying to help him manage in the moment with food. I imagine this isn't working effectively. And I imagine that it's not going to be effective to reduce the reactivity over the long run. I've worked with a few cases off the top of my head which sound very, very, very similar to this. The things that have really helped with those cases are things like working on the foundational integrative routine of the day, the activity schedule of the day. How does that look? Are we going on walks during busy times or quiet times? Should we be not walking? Should we be playing with them instead of going to the park? how much are they sleeping? Where are they sleeping? Many of these dachshunds I have to put in a back room in a puppy pen or a crate with 2 white noise machines blasting so that they sleep, because otherwise these little badger hunters, because that's what they were bred to do, they were bred to bugger off down badger holes and kill badgers. So these tenacious little terriers are struggling to rest throughout the day, maybe in an urban environment where there's more stimulus. What we're going to have to change is likely going to be quite foundational for these dogs. So it's hard for me to give specific advice, but I'd be thinking about how frequently is that dog reacting on a daily basis. If it's more than 5 times a day, we got to change that. We have got to change that either by making adjustments to the routine and the environment, or making adjustments to the dog's chronic stress state, thinking about going to a vet, about either like the medical side of things that could be going on potentially, or a stress management side of things. And many people would see a 16-month-old dog and see my recommendation to go to the vet to discuss chronic pain and chronic stress and be like, what? Like, how does this 16-month-old dog possibly have chronic pain? Much more common than you think. I'll send some resources for folks to learn more about in the follow-up email or in the show notes below. But some recent studies are indicating that 1 in 3 dogs over the age of 1 year old are dealing with some sort of osteoarthritis. That was a study from the Lincoln University in the UK. Lack of breeding standards, it'll do that, makes it hard. So we have to think more about this. And the chronic stress that a dog that might be suffering from chronic pain, who's in the city, might be experiencing, also they might need more help from a medical side of things. And I think it's also just worth saying that even if we are seeing young dogs, adolescent dogs, and we're thinking, gosh, this dog might be experiencing chronic pain, they might need medications to help with their anxiety, it can be overwhelming, but it's actually a lot more normal than you think. And I mean, look around the room, how many of us are dealing with chronic stress and need help managing our stress and anxiety. It is not unusual to need a little extra help here and there, and it doesn't mean that it's forever. Like, for example, many dogs deal with chronic pain flare-ups as they reach adulthood, and then we find out the ways that we manage that, and then they are pretty much fine, and we can just do their physio and make sure their exercises are the right exercises and they're okay. I want to just like stress that it's not like this bad thing. It's a good thing. We have tools that we can use to help and then we can make things significantly better and phase out those tools. TV barking is a hard one. TV barking often means that your dogs just can't watch TV because these animals can pop up so randomly with absolutely no warning. So often it means that like TV time is a no dog zone, but you're seeing this general trend of like, we have to admit when we can't fix something in the moment. Like, I think I've seen for myself, I think, oh, it's mean to not walk, it's mean to not walk the dog, or it'll be mean to put them in the bedroom to have a rest instead of having them with me while we're watching TV. Like, we can think in our head like, oh, it'd be so much nicer if they came to the barbecue, but actually if they're barking their heads off at every bird on the screen and it's rupturing the two of yours relationship, or if they're like Hero was so scared outside that he's unable to sniff, he's just scanning and panting, or if at the barbecue they'll be growling at the kids who are trying to touch them while they're resting, they don't want that. Like, they don't want that, trust me. They would rather be resting peacefully and then have you turn off the TV and say, okay, you were resting so well in the back room, for the next half an hour let's play together, and I'm going to give you my full attention for this next half an hour because I just watched Warr for 40 minutes and you were resting. You know what I mean? So it actually is often a blessing to them to set those boundaries for them. And then once you've set those boundaries and you get their perceived safety better, then we can start thinking about reintroducing the triggers in really specific, controlled ways, outside the scope of today's webinar to talk about that. Well outside the scope. But like I said, we have some resources on specific things like leash reactivity, separation stuff, etc. Check it out in the webinar library. But I think I'm going to have to finish with the questions for today. We got so many, but hopefully we'll be seeing you in either just around the internet or maybe in Feisty provider or a private service or something like that if you need any extra help. Thank you so much. Some people ask, you know, if you really enjoyed this session, how you can give back. Honestly, the best thing that you can do for our little gay BIPOC owned business is go on Google or Facebook and leave us a cute review, and tell everyone that you had a nice time and what you watched, and so they can go find it too, because that's honestly, the community is the best and most valuable resource for us. And so that's how you could give back if you'd like to. But really enjoyed, or just tagging us on Instagram, you know, if you don't want to do that, that's totally fine too, just so that everyone knows you're here and we were here. Oh, thank you, everybody. It was so nice to see you all. Let me see.